Everybody, it's Coach Tam, Chief Visionary Officer of 265 Point Total Fitness. And my, oh my, what a high time we had this morning with our Strive workout and Bible study. For those of you that haven't had a chance to experience it yet, it is actually where all of this started. 7 years ago, everything started with a combination workout Bible study, and we're still doing it today. Strive is free and open to the public. We have it every other Saturday and then every other Wednesday. So let me fill you in on what happened with today's study. So on Saturdays, we are doing what we call the Mission Impossible with a question mark series. We have been studying the book of Judges all year, and we have seen how God has used people that were unlikely heroes to do seemingly impossible things. And for the last couple of meetings that we've had, we've been looking at this unlikely hero named Gideon. So let me catch you up on what happened last time. So the last time that we met, Gideon had answered the call. He was obedient and he was taking steps in the direction that God had called him to. But the situation that he was up against was a little scary. The enemy was an army of 135,000. Gideon had an army of about 32,000. And then the last time we met, what we saw is God wanted to ensure that he got all of the glory out of the situation. So his small army, about a fifth of what the enemy had, was reduced from 32,000 to 22,000, and then at the end, all Gideon had left was 300 men. And that's where we pick up with our study today. So now Gideon has his 300 men, and he's preparing to go into battle. So go with me to Judges chapter 7. And I'm actually going to read, just for context, a little bit of what we studied last time, and then it will transition into our study for today. So Judges chapter 7, verse 7, the Lord told Gideon, with these 300 men, I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. Send all the others home. So Gideon collected the provision and the ram's horns of the other warriors and sent them home, but he kept the 300 men with him. The Midianite camp was in the valley just below Gideon. Verse 9, that night the Lord said, get up, go down into the Midianite camp, for I have given you victory over them. But if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah, listen to what the Midianites are saying, and you will be greatly encouraged. Then you will be eager to attack. So to summarize what happened next, Gideon, as we know, was someone that struggled with his faith, as many of us do. So he was afraid, and God knew that he was. And we talked about that. God knows who we are and what he is working with. So he often goes to great lengths to orchestrate things on our behalf to encourage us. And that's exactly what he did for Gideon. So Gideon followed those instructions, and just as he got there, he began to overhear a discussion. And in this discussion, a man was sharing his dream and the interpretation of that dream. And based on that interpretation, Gideon knew that the Lord was fighting on his behalf. So he got super excited about what God was doing. And he told the men, let's go, let's do this, because God has given us the victory. So as I shared, we discussed this morning, hey, don't underestimate the lengths that God will go to confirm his plan for us. These things that can seem to be coincidences or luck are really things that he has done a lot to bring together to assure us that he is working on our behalf. We also talked about how, sometimes that strong confirmation, because when Gideon overheard this, he was so inspired, he was so encouraged that he just went forward with no doubt whatsoever, which is a little unlike Gideon. So sometimes that strong confirmation that we're looking for from God actually comes after we are obedient, not before. And that's something that's important to remember, because often we want that assurance before we get going, but often God wants to see that we're going to take him at his word, that we're going to trust him and step out in faith. So the question is, will you trust him enough to take those first steps in faith? Now, after Gideon heard this word from the Lord, he also paused to worship God and to celebrate. So we talked about how that was a great reminder for us. Sometimes when God does things on our behalf, we are off and on to the next. But Gideon gave us a great example of taking a moment to pause, to thank God for all that he is doing, because after all, it couldn't be done without him. And sometimes it's a physical provision, but often, just as it was for Gideon, it's a mental and emotional provision. He needed that assurance in order to move forward. Now, it also talked about in this text how expansive the army was. Remember, 135,000 people to 300 people. And we talked about how if we were in that situation looking out, we could have easily been intimidated by what we see. And sometimes that intimidation causes us to not follow through on the plan that God has for us because we're looking at things in the natural. So in our group, we talked about that we can't get caught up in who the enemy is, what he or she has, what we believe that they could do. God can orchestrate things so that we don't even have to fight. That's what we saw in the text. If you continue reading, God gave Gideon a very strategic plan where they would go at midnight, blow the horns, crash these jars. And so the enemy woke up to hear all this noise, all this light, all this confusion, and they didn't realize that it was only an army of 300 people. They got so panicked that they actually started turning on each other and turning their swords on each other. So ultimately, they ended up not even having to fight in the first part of the battle, and that is often true for us. The things that we think we're up against, the things that we think are going to take us out and are going to overwhelm us, God has already accounted for them in his plan. All we have to do is step out in obedience. And then as we continued with the text, we saw Gideon and the Israelites become very victorious. And then they also recruited some help. There was a tribe of Ephraim that they recruited help from as they were nearing the end of this battle. And the Ephraimites actually had a bone to pick with Gideon because we learned previous in the book of Judges that Gideon actually didn't include them in his army initially. So they came to him and said, hey, why didn't you include us? And as we looked at Judges 8 verses 1-3, we saw the wisdom of Gideon. Instead of defending himself, instead of getting in the flesh, he actually responded with wisdom. And that's a reminder for all of us that lead, whether it's at work, at home, in ministry, in the community, that we have to pause. We have to learn to respond thoughtfully and not react emotionally. Because when we react, we can often not only damage relationships, but damage the plan that God has for us. I hope you enjoyed this recap, and I hope to see you in 2 weeks. Yes, we'll be back at it on Saturday, September the 7th. The workout starts at 7:45. Then we transition to the Bible study and get you out and on for the rest of your day. Again, it's free and open to the public. So visit our website at www.265point.com to sign up, and I'll see you there. Have a great weekend. God bless.